Hey everyone, buckle up, because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're going deep inside the mind of a self-aware sociopath.
Yeah, we're talking about a condition that most people think they understand, antisocial personality disorder or ASPD. But this is different.
Oh, it's different, all right. Raw, honest, no holds barred. This isn't some textbook definition. This is someone living with ASPD telling it like it is.
And he doesn't hold back. Like right off the bat, he starts talking about his childhood, how he always felt different.
Yeah, he actually says he felt like the only normal one, surrounded by all these weird emotional people.
Which is fascinating, right? Because that, in a nutshell, is ASPD. It's not about lacking empathy entirely. It's more
Like they're experiencing it on a different level.
exactly like they're watching us go through all these intense emotions and they're just confused.
It's like he said, kids freaking out over a puppy. It just baffled him. Why all the drama?
And you can see how that would be his reaction growing up with that disconnect between his internal world and everyone else's outward emotions.
So, okay, he's figuring out the rules of this emotional world he doesn't quite get,
Yeah.
and that's where things get interesting. He starts talking about manipulating situations to his advantage, like
Yeah.
as a kid in school.
Yeah, he tells the story about outsmarting his teachers, spinning these elaborate lies, and what's chilling is how almost proud he is of it.
Crowd might not be the word, but yeah, there's this strange detachment when he describes it. Like he's talking about a game of chess, not real people.
Exactly. And for him, in a way, it is a game. He doesn't have the same emotional anchors most of us do, so it's all strategy.
And he's very aware of that, by the way. He even told the interviewer he was sizing him up, too, figuring out how to play it. It's like, whoa, meta manipulation on another level.
And that's what's so crucial to understand about ASPD. It's not always about malicious intent. It's about navigating a world that feels fundamentally different to them.
Okay, so no grand gestures of love and romance then.
Yeah.
He actually describes relationships as more of a math equation.
Yeah, he's looking for specific traits, beneficial qualities, almost like building a team. It's very practical.
Which, again, goes back to that different wiring. We're all taught love is this grand emotional roller coaster, but for him, it's about logic, utility.
In a way, yeah. And it makes you think, how much do our cultural norms influence how we view this? Is his way of experiencing love inherently less valid just because it doesn't fit the traditional mold?
And even EC seems to struggle with that. Like he admits this approach probably causes harm, even makes him feel inadequate sometimes.
And that right there, the inadequacy, that was surprising. You'd expect fear of getting caught, but for him, it's deeper than that. It's about feeling like he's not measuring up, even on his own term.
It's like he's acknowledging that something is missing, even if he doesn't have the same emotional language to describe it.
Exactly. It suggests a level of self-reflection we don't often associate with ASPD. And that internal conflict, that desire for something more, that's huge.
So we get this fascinating paradox, calculated manipulation on one hand,
Yeah.
but a desire to not be hurtful on the other.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Which is why therapy is so crucial for ASPD. It's about harnessing that self-awareness, making conscious choices, instead of just reacting based on a different set of instincts. And the fact he's even doing this interview, being so open, it suggests he's on that path.
That's what I found hopeful, too. Like, he's trying. But here's the kicker.
Yeah.
His biggest fear isn't getting caught, it's being inadequate, leaving no mark on the world. It's like, even without those typical emotions, he still craves meaning, purpose. Makes you think, are we that different deep down?
It's a question we all grapple with, right? What drives us? What legacy do we want to leave? This guy's story, as messy and unconventional as it is, forces us to confront those big questions about human nature. But let's not shy away from the more intense side of this, He's pretty upfront about struggling with anger.
Yeah, there's a part where he even admits that if pushed to the extreme, violence is a possibility.
Which, again, is a good reminder that ASPD is a spectrum. Not everyone's the same.
Exactly. And to be clear, he's not condoning violence at all. He actually talks about it as a last resort, something he works on managing through therapy.
Which speaks to that self-awareness, that desire to change. He's also very open about battling, like a massive ego.
Oh, yeah. He talks about feeling better than other people sometimes.
Right. But, and this is important, he's quick to point out that he doesn't like feeling that way. It's something he actively tries to combat.
It's almost like he has this internal observer constantly commenting on his own thoughts and actions, trying to course correct.
And that recognition, that internal struggle, that's key. It's the first step towards actually changing those thought patterns.
He even admits that this feeling of superiority probably comes from, like, his intelligence. Being able to outsmart people which he recognizes, can feed into a kind of narcissism.
Right, and this is where we have to be careful. We can't just equate intelligence with ASPD. It's not like every genius is secretly a sociopath.
No, definitely not. And he actually says most people with ASPD are what you'd call high functioning. They blend in, they have jobs, families.
Yeah, you'd never know this whole internal battle was raging beneath the surface.
Like wearing a perfect mask.
Which actually brings up an interesting point about that term high functioning. What does it even mean? In this case, it means someone who can navigate the social world, appear normal, but
at a cost.
Exactly, at a huge cost. He even argues that, to some degree, we all engage in self-serving behavior sometimes.
Okay, how so?
Well, he uses the example of our impact on the environment, our consumption habits, prioritizing our own comfort over the planet's well-being.
Ooh, that's a good point. Makes you think. Right.
It does. It's like, where do WE draw the line? Are we as selfless as we like to think we are?
Okay, so he's not letting anyone off the hook here. Everyone's got their blind spots.
Exactly. And for him, that self-examination, it led to a pretty profound realization he was getting this sense of power from manipulating others.
Because he wasn't experiencing those same emotions himself.
It's like he was compensating for that lack of internal intensity by creating chaos externally.
And for a while, that probably felt good. Being in control, calling the shots.
Right. But it's a hollow victory. Eventually, it leaves you feeling even more empty, more disconnected. He actually describes it as living in the shadows, always whipping a mask. And that gets exhausting.
No wonder he ended up in therapy.
Right. Which, again, speaks to the power of therapy. It's not a sign of weakness. It's about growth, about learning new ways of coping.
He actually credits his therapist with helping him see the impact of his actions on others, how that self-serving behavior was actually holding him back from real connection, real happiness.
It's about moving beyond those transactional relationships and building something authentic, something based on mutual respect and understanding.
Which, for someone with ASPD, can be incredibly challenging. He even says it's like learning a new language, but instead of grammar, it's emotions.
Exactly. He has to be so much more deliberate, more conscious about things that come naturally to others, like telling his family he loves them, expressing gratitude.
It's like he's constantly having to remind himself to do things that most people do without thinking.
And that takes an incredible amount of effort and awareness of every little interaction. Makes you realize how much we take for granted.
Right. And, thinking about it, it makes sense that relationships would be a challenge.
Yeah, especially romantic relationships. He even admits that his approach, it can be a little
off-putting,
to say the least, especially for people who, crave that deep emotional connection.
Because on the surface, it seems like he's not bringing much to the table, emotionally speaking.
Exactly. But he also challenges this idea that there's only one right way to do relationships.
Okay, so what's his way? Because he actually calls it a math equation at one point, talking about how he used to choose partners.
Right. Like he was looking for very specific traits, almost like a checklist.
Yeah.
And look, it sounds cold. It sounds calculated.
It's definitely not the stuff of love songs.
No, not at all. But as uncomfortable as it is to hear, it's honest. And I think it sheds light on a perspective we don't often get to see,
Yeah. It's easy to write him off as, heartless. But he's not asking for sympathy. He's asking for understanding.
Exactly. And to his credit, he owns it. He's not making excuses for his past behavior. He even says he understands now how it probably made people feel, inconsequential.
Which is a pretty big realization, right? To go from seeing people as almost disposable to recognizing their inherent worth.
And that's where you see the growth, the self-awareness. Because he talks about regretting some of his past actions, wishing he could go back and do things differently.
Yeah, you can hear it in his voice. There's a lot of regret there. But also this desire to use those experiences to help others. Like he keeps saying, he wants people with ASPD to make better choices, to not make the same mistakes he did.
There's this really powerful moment where he says he's done living in the shadows, wearing a mask. He wants to be seen, flaws and all.
It's almost like he's taking ownership of the label, but on his own terms. He even questions whether sociopath is even the right word.
He prefers, and I'm quoting here, regular person with less emotions, which, might be oversimplifying things a bit.
But it cuts through a lot of the noise,
Yeah, it does. And it challenges us to rethink how we view ASPD. Because it's not about being a monster, it's about experiencing the world differently. And that difference, it doesn't have to be a bad thing.
He actually talks about wanting people with ASPD to use their unique abilities for good. Which, okay, that's a big statement. But what does that even look like?
Right. It's a question worth pondering because we tend to focus so much on the negative, on what people with ASPD might lack.
When maybe we should be asking, what do they have to offer?
Exactly. Like, what if we could channel those strengths, that logic, that ability to detach from emotion? What if we could channel that into fields where those qualities are actually assets?
Like, I don't know, science, technology, politics even.
It's about shifting the narrative, recognizing that diversity in all its forms makes us stronger.
It's about choosing empathy over fear. And honestly, I think that's a message we could all use a little more of these days. So next time you hear the word sociopath, I hope you remember this conversation. Remember that there's a human being behind that label, a person with their own story, their own struggles, and yes, even their own unique strengths.
Beautifully said. It's about time we started having these conversations, don't you think?